The transport train screeched to a halt, jolting the passengers from their uneasy dozing. Outside, the landscape seemed almost unreal to the German soldiers huddled in the cattle-like cars. Endless stretches of green fields under a sky so vast, it seemed to swallow everything. They had been told they were going to camps, that they would be treated according to international law, but the reality of arrival was always harsher than any official briefing. As the doors clanged open, a wave of cold American air rushed in, carrying unfamiliar scents of livestock, earth, and machinery. Soldiers shuffled forward, guided by uniformed guards whose expressions betrayed a mixture of boredom and curiosity. The prisoners' faces were pale, gaunt, some sunburned from weeks on the front, others already showing signs of malnutrition. Few words were exchanged in the stampede to disembark. Eyes darted nervously, measuring distances, counting guards, imagining escape routes that were impossible. Once outside, they were led along dirt paths that seemed endless, past rows of barbed wire fences that cut into the sky. The camp itself appeared at once both orderly and oppressive. Wooden barracks lined the grounds, neat rows of them, each identical, each hiding hundreds of lives within. The prisoners' first impressions were a mix of disbelief and silent relief. At least the buildings were intact. At least the water flowed and there was food waiting. Yet, under the surface, anxiety churned. Every step on the gravel seemed amplified. Every shouted command from a guard echoed like a threat. Inside the barracks, the prisoners were assigned bunks and issued basic supplies: a thin mattress, a blanket, a small metal bucket that served as a toilet, and a set of utensils. The spaces were small, with just enough room for 2 rows of bunks and a narrow walkway in between. Men who had been fighting, running, and hiding found themselves suddenly confined, forced to adjust to a life of waiting. Conversations were hesitant at first, often broken by language barriers, though most prisoners shared the basic German dialects that helped them bond. Some tried to maintain a sense of military order, forming small clusters according to old regiments, discussing tactics and news from Europe. Others fell into silence, staring at the walls, imagining home or wondering if they would ever see it again. Meals were a revelation. The American rations were different from anything the soldiers had eaten in years of wartime scarcity. Bowls of soup, slices of bread, and generous portions of meat were served in the mess hall, and at first the men ate cautiously, suspicious of the unfamiliar flavors. Soon, though, hunger won over hesitation, and plates were cleaned with an almost desperate efficiency. The abundance of calories, the regularity of meals, began to alter them in ways few had anticipated. Soldiers who had lost significant weight on the front lines noticed the first subtle changes: energy returning, cheeks filling out, and an unfamiliar warmth spreading through bodies starved for sustenance. Medical examinations followed shortly after arrival. The camp doctors, both American and German-speaking auxiliaries, documented each prisoner's weight, physical condition, and any injuries. Soldiers accustomed to hiding wounds or brushing off pain found themselves under scrutiny, measured, poked, and prodded. Many were embarrassed, not by the examination itself, but by the realization of how weakened and diminished their bodies had become. The reports noted surprisingly low weights in some cases, while others who had been more fortunate in rations and field conditions showed minimal deterioration. The presence of attentive medical staff, however, brought a strange comfort, a sense that their health mattered, that their bodies were being observed and cared for, a concept foreign to men who had spent years in the chaos of battle. Life in the camp settled into a rhythm dictated by guards and schedules. Roll calls punctuated the day, signaling the passage of time in a way that was at once mechanical and oppressive. Prisoners learned the exact moments to rise, march, and eat. The monotony was both a curse and a blessing. It removed the daily dangers of combat, replacing them with a predictable, almost soothing structure. Yet confinement also weighed heavily on the mind. Soldiers paced the barracks, read stolen newspapers, and wrote letters that might never reach home. Some exercised, running laps around the camp or performing push-ups, though the initial efforts were often halting, their weakened muscles reminding them of years of strain. Others simply lay on their bunks, listening to the wind ruffle the barracks, tin roofs contemplating what awaited them beyond the barbed wire. The first nights were the hardest. Many men struggled to sleep. The unfamiliar sounds of distant trains, barking dogs, and shouting guards infiltrating dreams. In these hours, thoughts turned to family, the front, and the uncertainty of war. Whispers of escape circulated quietly. Though most knew the notion was fantasy, bonds began to form, fragile and tentative, as men shared memories, food, or simply the act of talking to another human being. Humor, surprisingly, emerged even in these bleak surroundings, often dark, a way to reclaim some control over their new reality. Within weeks, small but noticeable changes began to occur. Soldiers who had arrived pale and gaunt found a subtle roundness returning to their cheeks. Muscles that had wasted from exhaustion started to regain some resilience, fueled by regular meals and rest. Even posture improved as the body no longer, under constant threat, relaxed into a new rhythm. Yet these changes were not uniform. Some men gained weight rapidly, their bodies adjusting to the sudden surplus, while others struggled to recover from infections or injuries sustained at the front. Tension sometimes flared, jealousy and frustration bubbling beneath the surface as prisoners compared themselves, measuring each other against memories of former physical prowess. As the first weeks turned into months, the camp became a strange world unto itself. Outside, the war raged on, but inside, life was strangely suspended. Men marked time by food, exercise, and minor routines. Letters from home, smuggled news, and gossip about the war created a fragile connection to the outside world. The physical transformations that began in these early days, weight gain, improved complexion, and renewed strength, were accompanied by emotional shifts. Some men found themselves calmer, almost reflective, while others felt an undercurrent of guilt for surviving comfortably while their comrades continued to fight. Arrival had been a shock, and adjustment was still ongoing. Yet, in these first months, the seeds of unexpected physical and psychological change were planted. The war had shaped their bodies in one way, the camp in another. Over time, the combination of food, rest, medical care, and structure would result in transformations that none of the men could have predicted. A slow, often unsettling evolution from the soldiers who had left Europe in a state of exhaustion to men whose bodies would betray the intensity of their new environment. By the time winter approached, the first hints of these changes were evident in the barracks, in the mess hall, and on the parade grounds, as prisoners learned, almost imperceptibly, that captivity had its own strange and relentless impact. By the second month, the rhythm of camp life had begun to feel almost natural to the prisoners, a strange stability in the chaos of war. Each day was mapped by bells, whistles, and shouted commands, creating a mechanical cadence that both reassured and constrained. Morning roll calls demanded that every prisoner stand erect, eyes forward, arms straight by their sides, the gravel crunching beneath boots and bare feet alike. At first, men stumbled with the drill, muscles stiff from months of constant movement, on uneven terrain, but slowly, as their bodies adapted to the unyielding schedule, a new kind of discipline took hold. Some found it oddly satisfying, the precision of timing and movement offering a sense of control absent from their previous lives of sudden attacks and constant threat. Meals had become the centerpiece of daily routine, the predictable abundance almost hypnotic. Mess halls filled with the clatter of tin trays and the murmur of German voices, punctuated by the occasional sharp word from a guard. Men who had survived weeks on meager rations now faced plates heaped with food. Stews rich with vegetables, and meat, thick bread, and sweetened drinks were a shock to the system, and the prisoners ate as though to make up for years of deprivation. Many noticed the changes first in the mirror, or rather, in the reflection of polished metal spoons and the glint of window glass. Faces that had once been hollow began to fill out. Arms and legs that had been thin and rigid grew plump in ways that were almost alien. Some men felt a twinge of unease, a suspicion that their bodies were betraying them, shifting in ways they neither wanted nor understood. Exercise was another pillar of the camp's strange routine. At first, only a few men participated willingly, preferring instead to lie on their bunks and let the day slip by. But the guards encouraged activity, offering the illusion of choice, and soon the yard echoed with the slap of boots against dirt, the thump of medicine balls, and the rhythm of coordinated stretches. Soldiers who had once been the epitome of battlefield fitness now struggled to lift their own weight, muscles fatigued from disuse and years of stress. Over time, however, repetition strengthened them in unexpected ways. The combination of rest, regular nutrition, and moderate exercise led to bodies that were fuller, heavier, and, for some, softer than they had been even in peacetime. Medical oversight continued to play a critical role in these transformations. Camp doctors, often young and enthusiastic, monitored weight, pulse, and overall health with meticulous care. Prisoners learned that feigning strength or hiding ailments was futile. The medical staff noted weight gain with clinical precision, recording increases of 20, 30, even 50 pounds in just a few months. Some prisoners celebrated these changes, equating physical restoration with survival, while others grew anxious, fearing that the excess might compromise their agility or endurance. The tension between desire for strength and fear of change simmered, quietly, influencing moods and interactions in subtle ways. Hygiene, another enforced routine, brought unexpected comfort. Daily showers, regular laundering of clothes, and inspections of the barracks' cleanliness created a sense of order. Soldiers accustomed to the mud, blood, and grime of frontline combat initially resisted, treating the procedures as humiliating, but gradually the ritual became soothing. Warm water, soap, and clean clothing reinforced the sense that their bodies were being cared for, that their well-being mattered in a world where it had previously been expendable. These small acts, combined with nutrition and exercise, compounded the physical changes in ways the men could neither ignore nor entirely comprehend. The psychological impact of these routines was profound. For many, the monotony itself was disorienting. Days blended into weeks, punctuated by the regularity of meals, inspections, and roll calls. The body, no longer under constant threat, responded in unanticipated ways. Metabolism adjusted, muscles regained tone or softened, and weight redistributed unevenly. Some prisoners developed pronounced roundness in the abdomen, a softness in the face that made them look younger or healthier than they felt. Others noticed the sudden growth of muscle, mass where weakness had dominated, giving an almost uncanny sense of resilience. Men whispered among themselves, exchanging theories, sometimes joking, sometimes concerned, about the strange new shapes their bodies were taking. Even work assignments contributed to these changes. Tasks in the camp, repairing fences, cleaning, grounds tending gardens, were designed more to occupy time than to exhaust labor, yet they demanded movement that complemented the structured exercise. Hands calloused by years of combat slowly adapted to less violent, more repetitive forms of labor. Knees, once stiff from marches and trenches, regained flexibility. Shoulders, previously burdened by packs and rifles, moved with a strange new freedom. The human body, deprived and disciplined in equal measure, seemed to find balance in this unusual environment. Interactions among prisoners further influenced physical outcomes. Sharing meals meant access to additional food, while cooperative exercises allowed the less fit to participate without embarrassment. Social pressures encouraged conformity. Men who gained weight rapidly were sometimes teased, while those who resisted physical changes were urged to join activities or eat more. Bonds formed through shared routines reinforced compliance with camp regulations, yet also created a subtle hierarchy of appearance and fitness. In quiet moments, soldiers observed one another's transformations with fascination and envy, noting the roundness of a comrade's cheeks or the sudden heft in a friend's frame. Sleep routines, too, affected the body. Lights out was strictly enforced, and though initial resistance was common, most men eventually succumbed to the schedule. Rest allowed for recovery, but it also had surprising effects on appetite and metabolism. Men who had once subsisted on adrenaline and fear now experienced hunger and satiety in ways previously unknown. Nights of uninterrupted sleep contributed to weight gain, enhanced muscle repair, and the slow return of energy, creating bodies that were both stronger and stranger to their owners. By the end of the second month, the transformation was undeniable. Prisoners who had arrived gaunt and hollow-eyed now carried a weight and presence that startled them in reflections or mirrors. Posture improved, skin glowed with health, and even the gait of many men altered under the newfound strength of legs and torso. Yet alongside these changes, a pervasive sense of uncertainty lingered. Soldiers were aware that their bodies were changing in ways they had not chosen, that the environment of the camp, food, rest, hygiene, exercise, was shaping them just as much as the war had. Some embraced it, savoring a body restored and renewed. Others recoiled, afraid that comfort and confinement had created a weakness that would betray them once the front returned. Even the guards began to notice. American officers, initially indifferent, remarked privately on the rapid physical restoration of the prisoners. Reports circulated in camp offices, noting weight gains, improved vital signs, and increased overall health. The phenomenon became a subject of quiet fascination, a reminder that war's influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Within the barracks, conversations shifted. Soldiers debated whether the changes were positive or insidious, wondering if they would regret the newfound ease once freedom returned. Yet no matter the opinion, the routines continued, inexorable and precise, guiding the bodies of men into forms neither predicted nor entirely welcome. By the time spring approached, the camp had assumed a rhythm that seemed unalterable. Prisoners had adjusted, reluctantly or willingly, to the routines that dictated every aspect of their day. They had gained weight, recovered strength, and felt energy return in ways that were both exhilarating and alien. Physical changes, once subtle, now became apparent to all. Fuller faces, broader waists, increased muscle mass, and a sense of robustness that contrasted sharply with the gaunt figures that had arrived months before. Life within the fences created its own ecosystem, one where bodies were no longer forged by war alone, but by the strange, deliberate order of captivity. Life behind the barbed wire was a strange blend of confinement and unexpected community. The prisoners, though restricted in movement and under constant supervision, began to carve out a semblance of daily existence that was almost separate from the war raging beyond the fences. Barracks became living spaces in a very literal sense, their interiors arranged to reflect personal touches wherever possible. Small photographs from home taped to wooden walls, makeshift shelves for books, and stacks of personal items like combs, razors, and notebooks. Despite the uniformity imposed by the camp, each man sought to assert individuality, a quiet rebellion against the constraints surrounding them. Friendships developed slowly at first, often born from necessity rather than choice. A soldier with medical knowledge might assist another recovering from illness or malnutrition, while those with experience in carpentry or mechanics found themselves called upon to repair barracks, furniture, or equipment. These exchanges fostered bonds that transcended rank or previous enmities, creating fragile networks of trust. Men who had once been fierce adversaries now shared laughter, food, and conversation under the watchful eyes of guards. The camaraderie that emerged was tempered by the awareness that the world outside remained perilous and unpredictable. Conflicts, however, were unavoidable. Prisoners squabbled over resources, sleeping arrangements, and perceived slights. Minor incidents could escalate into tense confrontations, the underlying frustration of captivity often manifesting physically. Fists were occasionally raised, voices shouted, and the rare brawl reminded everyone that, despite regular meals and exercise, the raw instincts of survival remained. Guards rarely intervened in minor disputes, letting the prisoners' self-policing mechanisms maintain order. Over time, the men learned to navigate these tensions carefully, balancing assertiveness with diplomacy, understanding that life behind barbed wire demanded both patience and cunning. The camp's social structure became increasingly complex. Informal hierarchies emerged, often based on prior military rank, perceived intelligence, or charisma. Men with commanding personalities or sharp wit drew followers, while those quieter or more withdrawn were left to their own devices. These dynamics influenced both physical and psychological well-being. Soldiers with status found greater access to food, minor luxuries, or lighter work duties, while others bore the brunt of labor or isolation. Weight gain, muscle development, and overall health sometimes mirrored these hierarchies. Those with favorable positions often fared better physically, while marginalized prisoners struggled to maintain strength and morale. Daily interactions extended beyond the barracks. Prisoners engaged in recreational activities, forming soccer teams, organizing card games, and staging amateur theater performances. These distractions offered more than mere entertainment. They became crucial mechanisms for maintaining mental health and regulating stress. Physical exertion in games and sports complemented official exercise routines, contributing further to the unexpected transformations in body composition. Some men discovered abilities they had never explored, a latent strength or agility emerging in the controlled environment of the camp. Others noticed unexpected weight gain, the result of regular meals and lower levels of physical stress compared to frontline combat. Letters from home were another powerful force shaping life behind barbed wire. Messages brought both comfort and anxiety, connecting prisoners to a world they had been forced to leave behind. The emotional weight of these communications influenced eating habits, sleep patterns, and activity levels. Good news could spark celebratory meals or spirited games, while bad news might lead to loss of appetite, lethargy, or silent brooding. Even the physical effects of anticipation, racing hearts, tense muscles, and disrupted sleep, contributed to subtle changes in the body, reinforcing the complex interplay between mind and physiology that defined captivity. Medical care, previously a minor concern for soldiers accustomed to field treatment, now became a central component of life. Routine checkups, vaccinations, and dietary adjustments ensured that most prisoners were healthier than they had been in years. Doctors and nurses monitored growth, weight, and general vitality, often commenting on the rapid improvements they observed. The combination of structured nutrition, rest, and attention created a paradox. Men were prisoners, stripped of freedom, yet paradoxically healthier and stronger than many had been during active combat. This juxtaposition sparked introspection, pride, and unease in equal measure, as soldiers grappled with the realization that their bodies were adapting in ways they had never anticipated. Work assignments remained a constant element of daily life, though they were carefully regulated to prevent exhaustion. Prisoners tended gardens, repaired buildings, maintained equipment, or assisted in camp kitchens. Physical labor, though less demanding than wartime exertion, still taxed the body in novel ways. Soldiers who had survived weeks of hunger and violence found themselves challenged by repetitive, controlled effort, often resulting in unexpected muscular development or endurance gains. These routines, combined with nutrition and recreation, created a convergence of factors that shaped prisoners' bodies more rapidly and consistently than they had experienced in years. The emotional climate of the camp was as variable as the weather. Moments of levity, shared meals, jokes, storytelling were countered by periods of despair, longing, and uncertainty. Men struggled with guilt over surviving in relative comfort, while friends and family faced danger or loss abroad. Psychological strain sometimes manifested physically. Some prisoners lost weight or became tense, while others overate or indulged in sedentary habits. The interplay between mental state and physical change became increasingly evident, and officers documented the phenomenon with both curiosity and concern. By the third month, life behind barbed wire had established a rhythm that was at once predictable and unsettling. The prisoners had adapted to routines, friendships, and hierarchy, yet remained acutely aware of the larger war beyond the fences. Physical transformations became harder to ignore. Faces looked fuller, limbs carried more weight, and even posture and gait reflected the changes wrought by regular food, exercise, and rest. Emotional growth paralleled these physical shifts. Resilience, patience, and adaptability became key survival tools. Men observed one another with fascination and sometimes envy, noting how captivity had reshaped bodies and minds in ways that no battlefield or march could have anticipated. Despite the constraints, life behind barbed wire was paradoxically vibrant. Social networks, work, recreation, and medical care created a controlled ecosystem in which prisoners' bodies and spirits evolved simultaneously. The initial shock of confinement had given way to an intricate dance of adaptation, and the men discovered that survival was not merely about endurance, it was about transformation. The camp, with all its rules, routines, and restrictions, had become a laboratory for human resilience, shaping men physically, emotionally, and socially in ways that were profoundly unexpected. By the 4th month in the camp, the changes in the prisoners' bodies had become unmistakable. Men who had once been gaunt, faces hollow from hunger and stress, now carried a weight and presence that startled both themselves and the guards. The abundance of food, combined with rest and regulated activity, had created a transformation that was, for some, shocking in its speed and scale. Cheeks rounded, bellies filled out, and previously taut muscles softened in places where once they had been rigid from exhaustion. In some cases, the weight gain surpassed 50 pounds, creating a visual reminder of how drastically life behind barbed wire differed from the front lines of Europe. Doctors and guards alike observed these changes with a mix of curiosity and fascination. Medical logs documented the transformations meticulously. Body mass indexes rose, blood pressure normalized, and vital signs improved in prisoners who had previously been on the brink of collapse. Yet for the men themselves, the shifts were often accompanied by conflicting emotions. Pride mingled with guilt, pride in regaining health and strength, but guilt at becoming comfortable while comrades continued to fight or perish abroad. Some soldiers began to avoid mirrors, fearful of what they might see, while others inspected themselves obsessively, tracking every new curve or increase in girth. Physical change was not limited to weight gain alone. Muscles, though softer in some areas, developed in others through daily work assignments and exercise routines. Soldiers assigned to repair barracks, tend gardens, or chop firewood found that their bodies adapted to these repetitive movements, sometimes in ways that mirrored previous wartime conditioning. Strength returned unevenly. Some men discovered that arms and legs regained power, while torsos or facial muscles became fuller without increased definition. The contrast between old, battle-hardened bodies and their new forms created a sense of dissonance, an almost alien feeling as they moved through familiar tasks with unfamiliar ease. Even small routines magnified the transformations. Breakfasts, lunches, and dinners offered consistent caloric intake far exceeding what most soldiers had experienced at the front. Snacking between meals, encouraged or allowed by guards, added to caloric surplus. Combined with light exercise and labor, these routines produced a slow, persistent shift in body composition. Some prisoners reported increased energy and stamina, a startling contrast to the fatigue that had once defined their existence. Others noticed unexpected weight in areas like the midsection or thighs, which caused both discomfort and fascination. Body shapes altered not through strenuous activity or deliberate training, but through the intersection of monotony, nutrition, and rest, a transformation entirely imposed by circumstance. Psychological effects accompanied these physical changes. Soldiers struggled with the unfamiliarity of strength without danger, comfort without action. Some welcomed it, relishing the return of vitality and endurance. Others felt a subtle unease, as if their bodies were betraying the discipline and toughness forged in combat. Sleep patterns, stabilized by camp regulations, allowed for proper recovery and contributed to the physiological changes, yet also created a sense of artificiality. Soldiers were gaining weight and regaining strength in an environment that, though safe, was not truly reflective of the realities awaiting them beyond the fences. Jealousy and social comparison began to influence daily interactions. Men noted which comrades had gained more weight or muscle, and whispers spread about those who appeared especially robust or transformed. In some cases, these comparisons fueled camaraderie and encouragement. In others, resentment or insecurity emerged. Those who adapted most visibly to the camp's conditions sometimes assumed informal leadership roles, their robust appearance lending credibility to their words or actions. Conversely, men who resisted weight gain or remained frail experienced subtle social marginalization, further emphasizing the intertwined nature of body, psychology, and social hierarchy within the camp. Health complications, though rare, also emerged. The rapid shift in diet and activity levels caused digestive issues, fatigue, or swelling for some prisoners unaccustomed to such caloric abundance. Doctors monitored these cases carefully, adjusting diets and advising moderation, though the overall trajectory remained consistent. The majority of prisoners were gaining weight, strength, and vitality. In this controlled setting, the body responded predictably, revealing the remarkable resilience of human physiology. When stress is removed, nutrition is provided, and rest is abundant. Personal perception of self shifted alongside these physical transformations. Soldiers began to recognize that the man they saw in reflections or mirrors was no longer identical to the one who had marched across European battlefields. Some embraced the fuller, stronger appearance, seeing it as a return to normalcy and health. Others recoiled, uncomfortable with the softness and weight that contrasted with prior notions of strength, discipline, and readiness. Mirrors became sites of contemplation, sometimes frustration, as men confronted the tangible results of captivity's unique influence. Even minor behavioral adaptations reinforced these transformations. Men who had once skipped meals or rationed portions now ate heartily, trusting the regularity of the camp system. Sedentary periods between work assignments encouraged rest and recovery, allowing muscles to repair and weight to stabilize. Leisure activities from card games to soccer matches provided intermittent physical engagement without exhausting exertion, further shaping bodies in ways both subtle and profound. Over time, the prisoner's physical evolution mirrored the controlled, ordered environment, predictable, measured, and inescapable. The intersection of physical and mental adaptation became increasingly apparent. Soldiers noticed that energy levels improved alongside weight, that mood swings eased as the body stabilized, and that new routines brought a sense of control previously absent in chaotic wartime conditions. Yet the very predictability that allowed bodies to thrive also produced a form of restlessness. Some men worried about the consequences of returning to the front with a body now conditioned for ease rather than battle, fearing vulnerability, diminished agility, or the loss of the sharp edge honed in combat. By the 5th month, the transformation was undeniable. Men who had entered the camp, emaciated or injured, now walked with visible weight and energy, their physical forms often at odds with memories of themselves on European soil. Bodies carried more mass, muscle distribution shifted, and overall health improved dramatically. Soldiers' reflections, once a source of shock, became points of curiosity and sometimes pride. And yet, underlying this evolution was a shared recognition. The body could adapt, but adaptation carried consequences, physical, emotional, and social, that none had fully anticipated. The camp, designed to contain and control, had inadvertently created a laboratory of human transformation. In the controlled intersection of diet, rest, exercise, and routine, prisoners' bodies changed in ways dictated not by battlefield necessity, but by environmental predictability. These shifts, weight gain, muscle development, renewed energy, were unexpected, powerful, and, in some cases, disorienting. Soldiers began to understand that survival was no longer only about endurance or strategy, but also about navigating the new realities of their own transformed selves. As the war drew to a close, the camp grew restless. Rumors of imminent liberation spread like wildfire, and the anticipation electrified the prisoners' daily routines. Men who had grown accustomed to the structure of camp life suddenly felt impatience and anxiety. The routines that had dictated their days for months, the regulated meals, the mandatory exercise, the predictable labor, would soon vanish. With freedom approaching, a new form of uncertainty settled over the men. The question of how their transformed bodies would respond outside the confines of the camp. The release process was methodical. Prisoners lined up for final inspections, medical evaluations, and paperwork, their appearances carefully recorded one last time. Many were startled by their reflections during these examinations. Faces once sunken and hollow were now fuller, cheeks flushed with color. Arms and legs had regained weight and strength, torsos were heavier, and posture had improved. Some marveled at the changes, scarcely recognizing the men staring back at them. The contrast between their wartime selves and the present was stark, a reminder of how drastically life behind barbed wire had reshaped them. As prisoners stepped beyond the fences, the world outside appeared both familiar and alien. Cities and towns bore the scars of battle, and families waited with anticipation, grief, or relief. For many, the reunion with home and loved ones was overwhelming, compounded by the realization that their bodies, now transformed, did not entirely resemble the men who had left. Children barely recognized fathers whose midsections had thickened, whose muscles were fuller or softer, and whose faces reflected both health and the stress of captivity. Some prisoners laughed at the irony of their condition, while others felt a quiet unease, aware that the comforts of camp had produced a body untested by the exigencies of post-war life. The physical changes carried psychological weight. Men struggled to reconcile their restored strength with memories of hunger and battle. Pride in survival and renewal coexisted with guilt for the ease they had experienced while others suffered abroad. Soldiers who had once measured themselves by endurance, agility, and battlefield prowess now had to redefine their sense of self. Fitness and capability were no longer dictated by scarcity and stress, but by abundance and structure, a paradox that produced both satisfaction and discomfort. Social interactions after release highlighted the complexity of these transformations. Returning soldiers noted differences in stature, weight, and energy among comrades, comparing themselves and others to shared memories of wartime form. Conversations often centered on appearance, health, and readiness, revealing both pride and anxiety. Some men embraced the changes, seeing them as proof of resilience and adaptability. Others were self-conscious, acutely aware that their bodies had softened or shifted in ways that might hinder reintegration into labor, military service, or civilian life. Health consequences, though largely positive, were not uniform. Some men struggled with lingering digestive issues or unexpected fatigue as their bodies readjusted to less structured routines and irregular meals. Others experienced newfound strength and stamina, amazed at how rest and consistent nutrition had restored capacities they had assumed lost forever. Emotional well-being mirrored these physical realities. Men who adapted quickly reported improved mood and clarity, while those distressed by bodily changes faced lingering anxiety and self-doubt. Reflecting on their months in captivity, many prisoners acknowledged the paradox of the experience. The camp had been restrictive and dehumanizing in many ways, yet it had also facilitated remarkable physical and mental recovery. Soldiers recognized that their bodies had responded to the structured environment with a resilience that surprised them. Muscles that had wasted in battle regained tone, weight lost to hunger returned, and overall vitality improved. Yet alongside these benefits lingered the recognition that such transformations came at the cost of freedom, autonomy, and the daily engagement with life that war had once demanded. Letters and photographs became tools of reflection. Many prisoners documented their appearance, weight, and health, often noting the differences between the beginning and end of captivity. These records were both personal and communal, shared among friends as evidence of survival and adaptation. Some wrote with humor, noting newfound girth or softening muscles, while others recorded observations with a clinical precision reminiscent of the camp's medical logs. Each account revealed the complex interplay between environment, routine, and physiology, offering insight into how human bodies respond to predictable structure after prolonged stress. Reintegration into civilian life presented both challenges and opportunities. Men returned to labor, study, or military service with bodies that were stronger in some ways and weaker in others. The weight gained in captivity sometimes hindered endurance in rigorous work, yet the overall health improvements allowed for more sustained activity over time. Emotional resilience, honed through months of controlled adaptation, facilitated social adjustment, though lingering anxieties about appearance, stamina, and identity persisted. Many soldiers acknowledged that the camp had fundamentally reshaped their relationship with their bodies, teaching lessons in care, nutrition, and the subtle power of routine. As the months turned into years, the memory of the camp and its influence on the body remained vivid. Veterans spoke of weight gain, restored strength, and the odd comfort of structured living, They reflected on how captivity, paradoxically, had allowed them to reclaim vitality lost to war. Some men embraced these changes, integrating lessons of nutrition, rest, and exercise into their post-war lives. Others struggled with lingering discomfort or self-consciousness, haunted by the unnatural speed and scale of their transformations. Yet all shared a common recognition. The camp had been a crucible, shaping not only survival, but the very contours of their bodies. Ultimately, the story of the prisoners' physical changes became inseparable from their larger experience of war and captivity. The barbed wire, once a symbol of restriction, had paradoxically created conditions for restoration. Men who had endured hunger, fatigue, and injury emerged transformed, their bodies and minds reshaped by an environment designed to contain rather than challenge. Reflection revealed the profound lessons of this unexpected evolution: resilience, adaptability, and the intimate link between mind, body, and environment. The soldiers' journeys illustrated that survival is never merely a matter of endurance. It is a matter of transformation, shaped by circumstance, routine, and the strange, unanticipated consequences of captivity.